Hello and welcome to another Thursday here on Viking TV. I hope you know by now, if you've been watching for a couple of weeks, that I'm Anne Diamond. I'm a British TV presenter and journalist and a great friend of Viking. And it's been my honour to sit here on a Thursday afternoon, or whatever time of day it is where you're watching, and just meet the most fascinating people who've made a name, people who've illuminated the skyline for us, and people who I am just basically thrilled to meet. I've got one of those wonderful jobs again. I've always said that I've been blessed with some of the best jobs on the globe, I think, and this is the latest of them, because every Thursday I get to meet somebody extraordinary, and it is my absolute privilege to introduce them to you. So shall we go straight to today's? She is, if you want to say, the embodiment of the true great American dream. She is not just the embodiment of the great American dream that we often think of as being the rags to riches saga, but actually of the inspirational belief that you can be just an ordinary kid who can achieve almost anything if you truly believe you can, courtesy, of course, of the good old USA, because that can give you the opportunity. That was always the great American dream. And it is absolutely the story of my next guest, who as a little girl had very big dreams. Now, this is how she grew from a little girl, just an ordinary kid, probably with very, very big ideas. And she grew from this photograph of a little girl in a school yearbook to this. We should be able to see, I hope, something that's an absolutely iconic image of Annalie in her space helmet, because this amazing iconic photograph has become absolute legend. It does sort of sum up all those feelings of the great American dream. But at the time, of course, it meant an awful lot more to many women all over the globe, because that beautiful human face belongs to the first ever mother in space. She is a mathematician, a chemist, a highly trained emergency room doctor, and an astronaut. And she is Annalie Fisher, and she joins me now from her home outside Houston in Texas. And it's wonderful to meet you, Annalie. Hello.
Hello, Anne. It's just wonderful to be here with you and talking to people all over the globe. It's like being back in mission control again.
Well, absolutely. Or up in space looking down on an amazing Earth. Let's come right down to basics, though, because we're all sort of in lockdown in our own houses all over the globe, linking up in this very special way. But how is lockdown for you? How is it around you? Where are you? Who are you with? How are you coping?
Well, you know, in Houston, we certainly have had lockdown, and it's just been a very unusual experience for myself. I've actually been relatively busy because I've been able to do virtual talks with school children. My partner and I are enjoying time together. In fact, it's kind of nice. I was traveling more the last year than I've ever traveled in my life, other than going into space. So it's been actually nice just to be home, and I keep putting off doing the closets and everything, but but I'm really actually enjoying it and have been very busy.
As a doctor, where do you see it all going? What do you think is going to happen next?
Well, I mean, tomorrow in Houston, we actually open up some of the malls, some of the restaurants, of course, with social distancing, and salons and those sorts of things are still waiting for the phase 2, depending on testing. But I have no doubt that we're going to eventually get back to normal. Because it's going to take a while to get a vaccine. That always takes months. It's not something you can do easily overnight. So it's going to be a while. But I think as we get more people that are immune to the virus and have been exposed, I think we'll just generally open up, and I think people will probably treat it eventually just like the flu, like we've done for any of these serious illnesses. And the flu is a serious illness for people that are elderly, and sometimes for young infants as well. So I think we will just learn to live with it eventually. But, certain places like New York, and as we talked to London, those high density places, it's probably going to take a while for them. But I think here in Texas, where we have quite a bit of room, and in other places in the United States, that we'll slowly start getting back to normal. I certainly hope so. I mean,
Okay.
SpaceX is going to launch on May 27th. So for the
Yes.
space program, we're going to be really busy. They're going to be really busy. So.
Oh, there's lots to do and there's lots to get back to. I was just thinking, though, I mean, you've had this amazing training. Like I said, I think you wanted to be a mathematician. You changed to chemistry, didn't you? And then you went into medicine. And you did train as an emergency room doctor. You must have a tremendous empathy for what is going on in some of our hospitals at the moment.
Oh, definitely. And as a doctor who was trained, you really, that's what you're trained to do. My ex-husband is an ER doc, as a matter of fact, and has been right on the front lines dealing with all of the COVID problems. So it's definitely something that you take seriously. I think one of the things that happens a lot of times in medicine is you get exposed to so many pathogens that you really develop a fairly strong immune system. I really feel like I got really sick during my medical training several times, and since then I've really not had that much of a problem. So I think a lot of people do develop immunity, but of course even then some medical workers, nurses, technicians, doctors are going to get exposed to the virus. So but that's just one of the risks of the profession, and you understand it just like as an astronaut. You understand the risk that you're undertaking, and if it's something you believe in and love, then you do it anyway.
Yeah, and a lot of health workers are doing it out of love and tremendous courage. But my goodness, do you know about that? Because, I mean, before we talk anymore, we really need to remind people just what you did and what you have achieved. It's you may not see it as your biggest ever moment, because if I asked you what's your most brilliant achievement, you'd probably say your two daughters, wouldn't you? Because you're a mom.
Oh, for certain.
Of course, yeah. But the rest of us, of course, see you as the first mother in space. We see you as somebody, as an astronaut. And how many of them are they? So let's have a look at your biggest moment, to us at least, the one that made you a really global figure, the one that made you the first ever mother in space, your mission aboard the space shuttle. And I think we've got video of it now taking off. And it's extraordinary to think that you are inside this amazing rocket, really, going up into space and taking you on the adventure of a lifetime.
It is kind of a surreal experience whenever I look at that video, remembering that I was inside and what I was feeling and what it was like. Sometimes it almost seems like a dream as you're watching it, but I remember it very well. And it was definitely a big moment.
I know you train for it, and I know you train on these amazing machines that give you the feeling of G-force. But when you're actually sitting on it, and it is the day and the moment that you're going to be blasted into space, you must have the most extraordinary feelings, despite your training.
Oh, yes. If anyone says they're not scared, they're lying to themselves and to others, because you definitely don't know. Although the shuttle had a pretty tremendous safety record, looking back on it. But again, when I flew, it was early in the program. So, when that clock goes inside 30 seconds, and then certainly within 10 seconds, it's, definitely, at that point, you're pretty much along for the ride, and
Yeah.
and you're relying on all these wonderful people that did their job so well to make sure you're safe. But when those solid rockets ignite, you may not know where you're going, but you know you're going somewhere. And it was just the most exhilarating feeling. In a way, it was freeing, because at that point, you know, you've made your commitment, you've made your peace with everything, and now you might as well just enjoy the experience.
And then, does it happen quite suddenly? Suddenly, you are at the outside, the window is black, and you are weightless.
Well, to go from 0 kilometers per hour to 26,500 kilometers per hour, which is orbital velocity, takes about 8.5 minutes. And so it all happens, you know, pretty rapidly. And then in an instant, for a shuttle flight, the last about minute and a half or so, you are experiencing 3 Gs, 3 times the force of gravity. So, and then in an instant, when the main engine shut off, you go from 3 Gs to weightlessness, just, you know, in an instant. And it's just such an exhilarating, fun feeling, and the view is absolutely spectacular. So
oh, absolutely. And then of course your hair starts to float, and from there on we see you, you know, with your sort of hair floating like a halo over your head.
Yes, I call it space hair. Some of my female colleagues have a lot longer hair than I, and there's some pretty interesting pictures on the internet of some of them. But
and I guess
yes, it's fun.
As we're seeing in this footage, I guess you just can't resist doing some of those little novelty things. Like, I think you had a handful of M&Ms or some other sweet.
Oh, my commander would reward us with floating M&Ms. And of course, in that scene, I was not thinking about what else might be floating around in the atmosphere at that time. I think I would think about it a little bit more carefully next time.
No,
but,
don't think about that. Absolutely.
But no, it was so much fun.
Like I said, that is the mission that made you so famous and changed your life. It must have, from that moment onwards. I want to go back to that earlier shot we saw of you as a little girl. Where did you get your ambition from? Where did that ambition come from? Why did you want to be an astronaut at some point?
You know, when that picture was taken, I was in 2nd grade, and I remember, you know, neither of my parents went to college. My father joined the military at 17 and got his GRD, and my mom was from Germany, and she emigrated, and she had a technical education. And so neither of them had been to college. And for some reason, I just always knew when people asked me at that age, what did I want to do? Of course, the career of astronaut didn't exist at that particular moment. I just knew I wanted to go to college. I loved science. I loved math. I was a definite nerd, and I loved to read. And, you know, maybe that's why the isolation now also doesn't really bother me, because I always was somebody who, I never got bored when I was by myself. I always had things I wanted to do, but I knew from that very young age that I wanted to go to college and I wanted to do something. And then when I was 12, we were stationed in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and we listened to Alan Shepard's launch in May of 1961. And I can still remember being crowded around our physical education teacher at, like, you know, 7 or 7:30 in the morning. Well, I guess it must have been 8, but there was a, you know, bit of a delay because they were having a bit of a problem. And then I listened to him take off on that rocket and talking to mission control. And at that moment, I just said, that's what I want to do. And I never deviated from wanting to do that. But of course, as I got into college and so forth, there was, you had to be an astronaut, you had to be a pilot, you had to go to test pilot school, and women weren't allowed to do those things back in those days. We certainly now have some wonderful women that are pilots and have been test pilots and are doing an amazing job, Eileen Collins being the first female commander. But at the time I was making those decisions, that wasn't a pathway. So it was just total, so I decided to go into medicine thinking that perhaps someday I can at least be a doctor on a space station.
Oh, and you really thought that?
Yeah, no, I didn't tell the medical school admission interview that I was thinking that, but no, I had not given up, but it had started to seem like it was not likely. And then actually a very good friend of mine, on a chance conversation, had been following NASA. I was in the middle of my medical training and was so busy, and he happened to mention that NASA was looking for not only pilots but mission specialists. I found out completely by chance, got my application in one day before the deadline. 6 weeks later, was in Houston interviewing with the first group of women that interviewed, and 6 months later found out I was in that class. So it was like my life changed in a very short period from one pathway to a total different pathway. But
because at that time you were married at that time too, to Bill.
Yes.
You were both doctors. And then you saw this application, and I've seen your handwritten letter, basically saying, "Dear NASA, I've always wanted to go into space. Please take me on."
that was our assignment when the first day we got there for our interview at the Space Center. It's a week-long interview. So after we had our introductory meeting, they told us to go back to our hotel and write an essay about why you wanted to be an astronaut. I later learned, years later, when I was on a selection board for a later class, what happened to those essays. You would read them just before the applicant came in for their interview, and some of them are pretty funny.
Yeah, it's funny, and it's amazing. It strikes me how it's handwritten. It's very, very. It comes from somebody who just doesn't mind saying, "It's always been my dream. Please let me."
Well, we didn't really, it was like 9 o'clock at night, and we had to be up the next morning for our first, one of my friends, her interview was like at 8 o'clock the next morning, and we didn't have laptops and stuff, so you couldn't, do a print. So, you were in this little hotel. So I just took in fact, it's sort of funny because a lot of my speeches and things that I've done are notes are scribbled on the little pad by the phone at some hotels. I have a collection of them, but that was the best one.
It certainly served you right, hasn't it? So after that letter, and obviously they were very impressed with you generally, and then they announced the first 6 women astronauts. So you were one of 6. And I always find it interesting in that first, one of the very first press photographs they show of you 6, you're 3 either side of this enormous men's space suit. And I just wonder, at that point, had NASA thought things through, taking on women who were going to be very, very different? And some of the way that NASA is portrayed in popular media is that at the time it was a bit old-fashioned, maybe even misogynistic, patronizing. Was it like that for you 6? Or did they realize they were taking on women and they had to grow up and be modern?
No, I would have to say that we were very well treated. NASA had made the decision long before we showed up. And if you read some of the early literature about that selection process, they had made a commitment to select women and actually had a spacesuit design that they thought was going to accommodate all the women. It was designed to handle the 5th percentile female to the 95th percentile male. I can talk a bit more about it if you like. It turned out to be a little more difficult, but the suit that you see in that picture is the Apollo suit, the one that all the astronauts wore to go to the moon. The new shuttle design suit wasn't even available until several years later. So all the early work that I did in the water tank was with that Apollo suit, which is, that particular suit that I wore was Pete Conrad's because he was the shortest of the Apollo astronauts, but it still was way too big for me. And working in those suits is really difficult. But what eventually happened was it just turned out to be a lot more difficult than they thought to make the shuttle design suit small enough to fit someone my size. And eventually the program made the decision to just build the mediums and the large, and you had to fit into one of those to do a spacewalk. We're now trying to work really hard to make the next generation suit that will fit the smaller women and also the larger guys, but that's going to be the next generation suit.
So, and the other thing that I find very interesting is that I think you made it pretty plain from the beginning that you did intend to have a family one day.
I can't believe it when I look back on it, but when I was in the middle of my interview with the selection board, which is about a 1-hour interview with, people from the astronaut office, chief of the our division, some human resources. So there's about 10 or 12 people on the selection board. And we're sitting there and everything's been going very well, or at least I felt like things were going well. And then I said, and oh, by the way, in case it affects your decision, I do want to have a family someday. I realize it's not even legal in the United States to ask that question, one, and I advise both my daughters to please don't do as I did. But I felt, being the first group of women, that I owed that answer to them, that I really, both were very important to me. And, basically I'm an honest person, so I felt like I had to tell them that. And obviously it worked. I didn't intend for it to come together quite the way it did, to where I was assigned to my flight 2 weeks before I delivered Kristen. I wasn't quite envisioning it that way, but it turned out that I got to do the two best things that I love most all in the same year.
Yeah, but it did, well, yes, it did basically mean that in order to fulfill your career ambition, to go through with the mission, that at some point you would have to leave Kristen behind with her dad, and you would have to go up into space. And that's a hell of a wrench for any woman, any mother to feel, but obviously you were determined to do it. I did hear a story that during that year, basically the year in between Kristen's birth and your takeoff,
Right.
You filmed everything on video and took lots of pictures of you with her, just in case.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we videoed everything because I wanted her to, if anything happened, to be able to see us, how we interacted and how much I loved her. And she's actually watched that video since she's grown up and said, it was really moving for her to see, just because, as kids get older, sometimes there are some tensions that occur. And so I think it was really reassuring for her to see just how much, I loved her. But I was conscious of the fact that, I might not, that there was this chance she wouldn't come back. Yeah. And I'd been given this incredible honor to be in this group of women. So there was, I never allow myself to sit and second guess my decision. I just said, this is the commitment I made. I'm very lucky to have it. Whatever happens, I knew she would be well taken care of by Bill, my mom, and so forth. But I did want her to know how much she meant to me. And it's just interesting now that she's gone into broadcast journalism. We kind of joke that it was because she was, videoed so much and so used to being on camera.
Yeah, she never had any problems about being facing camera. We'll talk about her in a minute.
Right.
Now, about that flight. There's a lovely picture of you and the rest of the crew leaving to go aboard the shuttle. Right. And you're looking slightly off camera. And I think you're looking for Kristen, aren't you?
Well, that's a kind of funny story as well. Normally families of the astronauts are all together, and we have a family escort that brings them to the Space Center because, of course, they don't have the right badges to get onto the Kennedy Space Center. So, but because I was an astronaut and because Bill was an astronaut, he said that he was going to drive my mom and Kristen, and he would meet them at the Launch Control Center where all the families were brought, because he wanted to be there when I walked out since he could do that. But he told my mom, under no circumstances get out of that van because, there are all the newspaper people there and he wasn't supposed to be there. But as we were walking out, and of course, again, I have to remind people that this is before cell phones, and I hadn't really pre-coordinated and hadn't thought about it. But as I'm walking out, I know that my mom and Kristen are there, and I only see Bill, and I'm looking to see Kristen. And so my mom saw my eyes. And despite Bill telling her under no circumstances to get out of the van, she got out of the van. I saw Kristen. That picture did show up in a few newspapers around the country, but I don't think Bill ever got caught or got in trouble for it. And then I felt completely at ease, whatever happened. But it was funny that she just saw my eyes and knew that that's what I needed.
Oh, that's wonderful. She was 14 months then, wasn't she, when
14
you took
months.
off?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've gone up in that amazing sequence that we saw. You've gone up on the shuttle, and you're weightless, and you've got things to do. Clearly, you've got a job to do. But when you look out of the window, What do you see? How do you feel when you look out of the window and see the Earth below you and the darkness and maybe the stars above?
You know, it's such an amazing feeling to look at our planet, and you know, you don't see any borders from space, and then you look at the vast blackness of the rest of the universe, and you know, home becomes a very special place, and you realize just, you know, how careful we have to be, and take care of this wonderful planet of ours. But it, you know, it's such an incredible privilege. But it's also interesting that you feel a part of Earth, but kind of now in this, you know, time with the coronavirus and everything, it's amazing that even though you're talking to the ground and all that, you still feel very isolated. Of course, on shuttle missions, we were so busy that you really don't have much time to think about it. But it's a funny feeling because you're sort of a part of the Earth, but not really. And I listened to an interview with some of my colleagues when they were on the space station, and of course, they had much more than we had. They have sat phones that they can call their families. They have video conferences. They have computers with internet and email and all that stuff. So they have all this connectivity, and yet what they said in this interview, listening to them and several of my astronaut colleagues, is that even with all of that, you still feel isolated, even though you have all that connection. It's just but it's, you know, it's just a wonderful, amazing view.
Do you look for your home first? I mean, for instance,
Oh, yeah.
You look for Houston first.
Oh, yeah, the first thing you do, you know, I looked also for San Pedro, where I'm from in Los Angeles, and then of course you look for Houston and where you launch from, and you know, all those sorts of things. And then you know, I think as you're, you know, flying with international crews and all that sort of, everybody looks, you know, for their country, and then pretty soon, you know, it's a strange feeling, but eventually you feel, you know, more like you're just part of the world. But of course, at the very beginning, you're looking at all the things that, you know, are familiar to you.
And I know you've said before that you do feel that if more people, and maybe they will one day, but if more people could see the Earth the way you've seen it, maybe we would all try that bit harder to get along, stop killing each other and wasting time.
It really is. It really hits you when you look at our planet and you have a little bit of that distance, and then you don't see the borders, and you're not seeing all the, on the news, the terrorist things, the horrible things that happen around the world. And you know, you start to really realize, gee, even if you're lucky enough to live to be 105, as my grandmother did, that's still a very short period of time in the geologic sense. And you know, you only get this one shot, and it's just so sad that we can't really appreciate that wonderful life gift that we've been given, and treasure it, and respect it in everyone else. And I really am very excited about all these new opportunities with SpaceX and Boeing, and all the future abilities for regular people who don't want to be a career astronaut to get to see that view. I really do think it would go a long ways to perhaps helping us all begin to get along better.
I hope it happens soon. I think there was a lovely moment as well, I read somewhere, where a couple of meteors passed you, and it reminded you of a teacher that you once had who'd got you interested in mathematics by asking you to calculate when meteor showers might happen. Something like that. Am I right?
It was Dr. Miller. He taught the hardest class I've ever taken, bar none, even having, you know, well, maybe Russian is a close second, but other than that, it was quantum chemistry. And you have to realize that when I was at UCLA, it was right in the height of the Vietnam era and all the protest movements, so everybody had long hair, hippies and all that. Well, Dr. Miller looked like he just walked out of mission control with a buzz cut and everything, and he made us come in and pick up our midterm in person, which was really scary. As I mentioned, I was really shy, and I didn't think I had done that well. So anyway, we come in and go over my tests, and somehow the conversation came up about shooting stars. Had I ever seen one? And I said, well, no, sir, I haven't. And he looked at me like, well, you've got to correct that right away. And I went, okay. And he said, so when do you think would be a good time? And I said, well, probably at night. And then he proceeded to help me. We derived together the equations that showed that, when the best time, the highest probability of seeing a meteor or a shooting star. And it's just before sunrise and everything. So I guess one of the things I hadn't thought about when I'm going into space is that you would see meteors entering the atmosphere below you. Because you're above the Earth's atmosphere. Yeah. And so I remember looking at those and thinking, oh, hey, Dr. Miller, I bet you didn't think about that. And I was so disappointed that he had passed away, and I never got to go back and tell him, because to this day I would say that was like one of the most memorable interactions I had with a teacher, that they took time to talk about all that.
Yes, sometimes when wonderful things happen in your life, you are reminded that a teacher told you once that it might happen for you. Teachers are great people, they really are, or at least some of them are.
I've had some
that are really good.
I've had so many wonderful teachers. We would be here for quite a few hours if I were to talk about each one of them. I've been very blessed.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why you made it how you did. Of course, at the time you went up, it was 1984. It was before we were to learn that tragedies could happen with the space shuttle. Was before Challenger and Columbia. I just wonder, going through those two tragedies, being in NASA, how did that affect you as an astronaut and also as a mum?
I of course, it was a horrible tragedy and everything, but I think we all understood that was a risk. I mean, we knew that in the flights before the Challenger. I think it just made the risk more real. I think that you're able to compartmentalize that risk and kind of forget about it. Many of my colleagues were test pilots, and they talk about how each of them had lost several friends in accidents. Of course, coming from medicine, I had seen a lot of people die. Some of my colleagues that were in, more academic fields had perhaps not experienced that as much. So I think the Challenger and the Columbia accidents just really, the Challenger, I think, was not something that was unexpected, but it made you really face the reality of the risk, as opposed to just something off, some nebulous thought in the back of your mind. I do think by the time I flew, I had felt very confident of entry. I think we got very complacent about entry. I know I felt that the major risk was during the ascent phase, and after those 8.5 minutes were over, I honestly felt like I was home free, from that sense. And so it really wasn't until the Columbia accident that it really brought home again that, hey, this is a risky business and you have to pay attention to details every moment, and you just cannot ever get complacent.
There's nothing more numbing than that radio silence, is there? That goes on and on and on, and then in the end you realise, I'll never forget it. Nobody will. It's Mother's Day coming up, and you're probably one of the most famous mothers in the world. But how are you going to spend it in lockdown? What's going to happen?
I hadn't really had a chance to think about that yet because of the rules here. And although I would be very happy to visit either one of my daughters, they are both saying, Mom, you are in that high risk category. And I go, no, I am not. and so forth. And so I'm going, but in fact, I was just talking, I'm very blessed that both my daughters have married into wonderful families, and both their in-laws are just wonderful people. And I just heard from my younger daughter's mother-in-law saying, maybe we could all get together for Mother's Day. And so I was thinking, oh, that sounds like fun. But the last two Mother's Day have been very special. The one 2 years ago, Kristen showed me the ultrasound, and that was how she told me that she was, pregnant with the first grandchild. So that was really special. And we did a talk together. And then last Mother's Day, she came to the Space Center and we did a talk together, which was really fun I got to talk about what it was like to be one of the first women and to, be the first mom. And then she talked about her career and everything, and then we talked about growing up in this family, and then I talked about how hard it was to come back after that leave of absence, and then she talked about now what it was like as she's getting ready to have her family, and how she couldn't imagine, you know, leaving her daughter to go do something with. So anyway, it was just really fun. So the last 2 Mother's Days have been really special. So we're going to have to figure out.
You'll have to do this video conferencing thing that we're all learning about
Yes.
at the moment. But mind
Yes.
you, your daughter Kristen should know about that, because she is a professional.
Oh.
She's a White House correspondent for Fox News, no less.
Yes, she is. She's always giving me advice. I'm sure she will look at my background here and tell me what I did wrong today.
Oh.
But no, it's been really fun. She taught me how to take a selfie properly. She knows all that camera stuff, because in the early days, you know, when she was being trained, the on-air person had to do everything, their own camera, their own writing and everything. So
it's like that now. Now that we're all in lockdown and doing our own thing, it's like that now.
Having to do that, yes. And I gave a commencement speech a few years ago, and I made the mistake of asking both my daughters to review what I wrote, and they were not very impressed with my first draft. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I loved the draft that I saw. I don't know if it was the same speech, but it was at UCLA, I think.
Yes.
And you gave, I think, 12 points that you would always recommend to people, and I agreed with every single one of them. And if we went through them all right now, it would take far too long.
Oh, you know.
But they're the things that you've learned that are really important through life, and you should write them down. But I want to move on to Orion. Now, you won't remember this, but we have met before, but we didn't really properly meet. I was just on the same little tender going from the Orion, the Viking ship Orion, out to, I think, into Monaco harbour. And my sister and I were on the same ship. And we sort of said, that's her. It was very exciting just being on the same ship as you.
Oh.
But Orion, now, Viking Orion and the relationship between you and Viking Orion, how did it even happen? How did it start? And why is the name Orion so important?
You know, that is the strangest thing, one of the strangest things that happened to me, other than finding out about the astronaut selection serendipitously. I retired in April of 2017, and a group of my high school friends and I decided to go on a river cruise. And one of my close friends is a travel agent, and she arranged for us to go on a Viking river cruise from Amsterdam to Basel, Switzerland. And so while we were on that, of course, I had just retired, so they asked the chef to make a cake for me. And somehow, and I'm not quite sure how, it all got communicated back to the Viking upper management folks. And when I got back got home, Sarah called and said, you know, they'd like to talk with you. And so I got on a call thinking that maybe they wanted me to come talk on an ocean voyage or something like that, because I'd heard some of my friends had done that. And so I was talking with Corinna, and she said, well, we'd like to ask you to be the godmother of our next ship. I just kind of went, what? I mean, it was just so completely out of the blue and so unexpected. And my daughter was actually pregnant at the time, and she said, I think you're more excited about being the godmother of a ship than my grandmother. I go, well, you have to admit it is kind of unusual. But so then we were talking afterwards, and they, you know, they wanted to have sort of a space kind of a theme for the names. You know, some of the earlier ships are the sky, the sun, and so I said, well, you know, I just was working on Orion, and it's going to be the next vehicle that takes us beyond low Earth orbit. It's not going to the space station, it's going beyond low Earth orbit. And I said, you know, that would, for me, it would be meaningful if it met your approval to name it Orion, since I'm the godmother. So that's how it came about.
And of course, Viking love that, because Orion is a constellation,
right?
And Vikings have always sailed the world, or we don't know how much of the world, but they did it by looking at the stars. So it all knitted up beautifully, didn't it?
I know, it was just, I mean, it was, you know, I get goosebumps even talking about it, because, and so then when I arrived for the float out ceremony, and you actually see this huge, beautiful ship, and it said Orion on the side of it, it was like, I mean, I almost felt like it was another child, like it was my third child.
Yes, because you're a godmother. But and when I was there as well with you for what they call the shakedown, which is when they try out the ship in its full form, and we went from, where do we go? Rome to Barcelona. Which was just heavenly. Of course, they did the enormous Orion naming ceremony, and I think we've got Viking's own video of this now to watch. But it was the most spectacular event, almost, that I've ever seen.
Oh, and my friends, even my astronaut friends who've seen a lot of interesting, wonderful things, were really impressed, especially with the guy that flew around on the...
Yeah, there was a flying man. I think we've got video of it now. Let's see if we can bring that up now and see this full commemoration ceremony, the naming ceremony, which includes the amazing flying man at the end of it. I think we can get
all my astronaut pilot friends want to fly that thing.
I'll bet.
In the 14th century, an unprecedented period of enlightenment began, the Italian Renaissance. Initially taking hold in Florence, then inspiring creative minds as it swept through the heart of Tuscany, reaching all the way to the sea. Da Vinci stretched the bounds of possibility. Michelangelo forever changed art, while Galileo challenged the world to look at itself anew as he gazed upward to the Milky Way, the Pleiades, and Orion from his Tuscan homeland. 4 centuries later, Orion and Tuscany were linked again as Viking Orion was officially named in the historic port of Livorno on June 14, 2018. The godmother for this memorable event provided yet another link to the stars. Dr. Anna Fisher, a retired NASA astronaut, and the first mother in space.
I would like to take the opportunity to again thank Anna Fisher for being godmother here. I think it's great that you could come and bring your intergalactic experience. I'd also like to very especially thank His Excellency Monsignor Andreatta. I think it's not so often that a little company from Lutheran Norway can be blessed with a cardinal from the Vatican. But I believe you and Karina have become good friends, and we are so thankful that you can come here. It's such a great honor. Thank you very much.
This is a really special evening for me. I want to thank Mr. Hagen and Corinna for this incredible honor. And I just want to say that exploring and being a part of the space program was something that I can't even put into words how much that means to me. And as a result of that, I've gotten to do many incredible things, but this is perhaps the most incredible that I've ever had a chance to do. I look at this beautiful ship and I just feel like I'm blessed. And I just think that travel, people learn about other people and you get to explore. And again, the astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts realize that our similarities are much more than our differences. And as you travel, I think you really realize that. It's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Viking Orion is our 5th ocean vessel, and her naming ceremony included a stunning visual display projected on the Tower of Matilda in the Fortezia Vecchia.
Long before recorded time, there was only darkness.
Ranulph Fiennes, the world's greatest living terrestrial explorer, narrated a 6-act story starting with the creation of the universe and ending with the liberation of the sun. Inspired by Norse legends and interpreted by dancers and musicians, with performances from leading Norwegian and Italian artists, it was a dramatic presentation. Capped by a stunning spectacle, a flying man, who delivered the Viking axe from the Tower of Matilda to the bow of the Viking Orion. last, the moment everyone had been working toward had arrived.
I name you Viking Orion. May God bless you and all who sail with you.
With a splash of aquavit, years of planning became reality as Viking Orion joined Viking's award-winning fleet. The naming of Viking Orion was a remarkable event we'll long remember. It was incredibly moving. Viking Orion now proudly joins her elegant sisters, each one bringing the comfortable, welcoming ambiance and quiet sophistication of Viking's river cruise vessels to the world's great oceans. These small ships have been thoughtfully designed throughout to enrich every aspect of the journey, a philosophy that's led the readers of Travel and Leisure to name Viking as the world's #1 ocean cruise line year after year. With just 930 like-minded guests, the beautiful ships of Viking are making it easier than ever to explore the world in comfort.
Yeah, it was truly amazing. I had absolutely no idea, what I was getting myself into, but having watched Viking and listened to Mr. Hagen's talks about his philosophies and attention to safety and details, all of a sudden I realized, there's a lot of similarities between the space program and the shipping industry or the cruise industry, and it was just a unusual bringing together of two things that was just really amazing.
But it was the most amazing fireworks ceremony and this amazing flying man, as you said. And then in the end, you actually did do the naming, cut the cord and smashed the champagne against the Orion, and off it sailed. And it was wonderful too. And it even had its own planetarium on the top. Still does.
Yes. In fact, that was another fun thing when I was on the shakedown cruise for the Viking Sun, so I could see what it was sort of going to be like. I called it my Godmother training when I went on that. So it was just amazing to just see. And Corinna at the time was trying to decide whether they wanted to have a telescope to look at stars or whether they wanted to have an observatory. And so I got to actually see when they presented it to her, and I got to actually, she asked me my opinion, and it was really fun because I had this virtual tour of this planetarium. And then on the shakedown cruise, I got to see the final product of what it was like. And it was just an amazing experience in its own right.
Another video, which we will show, I think, I don't know, I'm being told, yes, I think we are going to show, is from another Viking video, which is called Beautiful Planet, in which you're talking. You talk a lot about the philosophy. I guess it's only natural that anyone who's been up into space, you do get a bit philosophical about the world, the beautiful Earth, what's happening underneath you. And we're now seeing the naming ceremony. So let's see if we can hear your words as you spoke them at the time on that wonderful evening in Livorno.
It was, it's one of the most special memories I have. It was just unbelievable. I had no idea that, Viking did such an amazing job with these naming ceremonies.
No, me either.
And the tie, of course, there was with Galileo, and that was the kind of the tie that Corinna and some of the folks were envisioning since. That was where Galileo was from, in that part of the world, and of course his discoveries led to what we're doing today in the space program. So,
and of course, Corinna, who we're talking about here, just in case people don't know, although I think they probably do know if they're looking at Viking.TV, Corinna is part of the family, of course, the Viking family, the Hagen family behind Viking, and she knows everybody. She knows absolutely everybody. So that ceremony was stunning in that the most major names and faces from the world of arts and drama and everything, they were there to celebrate.
And a cardinal. And a cardinal from the Vatican. It was like the most amazing thing. One of the funny stories.
I wanted to, before we go to questions, and there are lots of questions coming in for you, Annalie, I don't want to keep you too late, but before we go to questions, your thoughts at the moment. I've seen some very interesting pictures from the International Space Station about how pollution levels have gone down since the coronavirus. And I don't know, the world just seems to be slightly different from space, at least. And like I said, I know you have deep philosophical ideas about how maybe we would all be nicer people if we could see the Earth the way you have seen it. Final thoughts on that before we go to questions.
Well, it's just, again, I'm not sure I could say it much differently than what I did, but there's so many things you can learn and feel at a very gut level as you're looking at this amazing planet. And you realize, this is it. Who knows how long it's going to take, and if we ever will succeed of being able to go beyond our solar system. I firmly believe that someday we will. But you know what happened to the dinosaurs and everything. So I firmly believe in exploration and that we need to be prepared to go beyond our planet. But in the meantime, it's going to be a long time before we're ever able to do that. So we need to take care of this amazing planet that we live on in so many ways, in the people, yes. Especially the people that live on it.
Oh, absolutely. Elana Valley from Brookhaven says, Dr. Fisher, what do you like to read? And what are you reading right now? Interesting question.
Oh, yes. Well, what do I like? Well, when I was young, I loved the Nancy Drew mysteries. And then I loved reading biographies. I remember reading a series of biographies about all the women, like Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female doctor, Susan B. Anthony, Madame Curie. I read about all their lives, and I wanted to be like them. One of my favorite series isn't like a real well-known thing, but it's Clan of the Cave Bear by Jean, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Aurel, something like that. And it talks about, the early days, the prehistoric days of the evolution when we were dealing with the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnon and her ideas of how that's probably one of my favorite books, and it's a series. And then I also just like mysteries, and I love the Martian. That book that's like one of my absolute favorite. When I first read it, I was thinking that regular people wouldn't like it that much because he goes into a lot of technical stuff, but it was very potent. So I'd have to say that that's probably one of my favorite, more recent books.
I would have thought so, because he says, I'm going to science the way out of this dilemma.
Yes.
Yay for scientists.
I love that.
Angie Hayes from Clayton in Georgia says, Dr. Fisher, I'm in your same age bracket, but as a girl, I did not know that I could pursue my dream of becoming an astronaut or even a pilot. I do admire you. Do you think a healthy 70-year-old civilian might ever have a chance to go into space?
Well, right now, if you have a lot of money, I think you definitely, you can buy a space for, $200,000 on Virgin Galactic and get a couple of minutes in space. I do think so. I mean, Senator Glenn went into space. He was in his mid-70s.
Yes.
So I don't think going into space is like getting on a commercial jet. You do have to, I think, be in relatively good health, relatively, good shape, so that you can enjoy the experience. It's definitely, not something that you just walk off the street and do it routinely. No. But yes, I do believe that older people could go into space if you're in good health. But unfortunately, right now it's pretty expensive. But like the early days of aviation, I think the price will come down, and who knows, in 50 years it might not be, it might be much more attainable. I hope so.
That's too long to wait, Annalie.
I know.
Too long to wait.
I know. I would love to go as a tourist.
Would you really? I'm
yes.
sure you'll be one of the first invited.
I wish.
NASA have made a statement today saying that they are going to, I can't actually remember what it was, but there was a specific announcement today about human space travel again. It sounds as though it's with SpaceX, I think. But it's
SpaceX is having its first manned launch on May 27th.
That's what it is.
Yes, and so
where are they going to go? Into orbit?
It's just a test flight right now to check out the vehicle. Ultimately, SpaceX Dragon and the Boeing Starliner are two capsules being designed to take humans to the International Space Station. So there's those two, and then, like I said, Orion is being designed to go beyond low Earth orbit to go back to the moon. But so this will be the first time since the shuttle retired in July of 2011 that we'll be launching humans from U.S. soil again, and they've already had their unmanned test of the capsule. So this is their first manned test of the capsule. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. And their unmanned test was very successful. So I don't see any reason why this one shouldn't be.
It was mind-boggling to watch. I mean, did you ever think you'd ever see a rocket go up into space and then land back down on its base again? I mean, it was just extraordinary.
I'll have to be honest that when I first listened to Elon Musk talk, 10, 15 years ago, I really was not sure if he was all there. But I have to say that I have really come to admire what he's been able to do. We were just we were so excited and very proud of them for what they achieved. And it's a real tribute to his vision and the people he hires.
Leni Tangveld from Jensen in Oslo says, fantastic program. Did you ever get over the feeling of claustrophobia in space? Or did you get a feeling of claustrophobia in space? And do you believe there is more life in space than just us?
I'll answer the second question first, because that's a little easier. My crewmate, Joe Allen, has what I considered the perfect answer, and that is that the absence of proof is not the proof of absence. So I don't know if there is life. It's certainly statistically probable, and I'll have to just let it go at that. I don't personally know of any proof, but I like to think that perhaps there is. Yeah. So the question on claustrophobia, on a shuttle flight, there's so many windows that, if you started to feel closed in, all you had to do is go up to the flight deck and look out one of the windows, and you had the whole Earth there below you. In the space station, for a long time, they didn't really have that. They didn't have a great window, but now they have the cupola, which is where a lot of those amazing pictures are taken, which is a 6 windows almost in a circle, and then one window facing down towards Earth. And I think if you start to have any of those feelings, all you have to do is go to the cupola. I think more the thing that perhaps, the thing I would think about more on a longer mission is what I would miss would be fresh air and feeling wind on your face and so forth. I remember 2 of my colleagues were debriefing, and they had to do a ballistic reentry, and so the rescue forces were several hours away, and they had to get out of the Soyuz capsule themselves and wait. And I'll never forget his words about how smelling the dirt and the grass and feeling the sun on your face and the breeze after having been in space for several months. How that made them feel. So I think that's the thing that I would, because once you're on board the station or the shuttle, it's like being in a submarine, but you can't bring in fresh air like they do on a submarine once a week. So
isn't it interesting? You only notice those human things when you lose them, as it were.
Yeah.
Blaine Baggett from Pasadena says, this isn't a question, but just a note to say hello from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, where I work. He says, as you probably know, we are on schedule to launch a new rover and a small helicopter to Mars.
Yes.
Thanks for your ongoing support of space exploration. And that's from Blaine. Wow. I didn't know that.
That's exciting. And what I really love is the partnership between the manned program and the unmanned program. The folks at JPL probably some of the smartest people on the planet. And all the things you do are just as amazing and pave the way, for humans to go into space, because that's a necessary part of exploration, and it pushes us to develop our robotic capabilities so that now we have more robotic capability for doctors operating and so forth. So, a lot of times people talk about a competition between unmanned and manned, and I don't feel that at all. I think both they each have their place, and it's amazing the things that the folks at JPL do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour, and you have been talking a very long time. It was just exciting to hear you talk, Annalie. It really, really was. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope we meet again sometime, maybe on Orion.
That would be really. Yeah, I'm actually planning to go on a
travel again. Yes, and Sundays and do all the things that we humans.
Well, I'm scheduled for a cruise on Orion the end of the year, so fingers crossed.
We will see. We will.
And thank you for all the questions and everything from the audience. And I'm sure this interview will be posted.
Yes.
So that you can see the videos, and all you have to do is Google STS-51A2, and you can find more than you'll ever want to see. So thank you so much. It was a really fun interview, Anne. Thank you very much. And thank you to Viking for one of the neatest experiences in my life.
And all our love to you and your family. Look after yourselves. Keep safe and well until we meet properly again, all of us. Thank you so much, Annalie Fisher.
Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you. Annalie Fisher there, talking from her home in Houston, a woman who has been up in space, the first ever mother in space. Looking forward to Mother's Day. Will be a bit different this year, but a very proud mom she is too. And it's been an absolute privilege to be with her. It's a privilege for me to be with you every Thursday here on Viking Television. Because I've got some absolutely fascinating people for you to meet, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce you to them. So from Annalie Fisher, a woman who's been up in space, next week we are going to meet a very young lady indeed. I don't think her family would like me to call her even a child prodigy, and she really doesn't like being called the next Mozart, but she is only 15, and she is the most incredible composer, musician, violinist, and pianist. She can turn her hand to pretty much everything, and the world goes, oh my goodness, she's just a child. And she is, except as her parents like to call her, when it comes to music, she's an adult. When it comes to being a kid, she's just a kid. She is called Alma Deutscher, and she is my guest next week. She's quite extraordinary, and I really look forward to introducing you to her. Until then, have a very fun and very safe week, and we'll meet again next Thursday. Goodbye.
It's just such an incredibly beautiful planet. You cannot imagine what that view from space is like. And you look out into the vast darkness, at least so far as we know, there's nothing else out there, certainly nothing close enough with current technology for humans to live. You just realize what a special place this is. When you get up there, it's just absolutely magnificent. Then you fly over different parts of the world where there's problems. You'll pass over the Middle East and you'll look down there and you'll realize all the turmoil that's occurring there. I understand history and all the differing feelings that people have. But to, waste our time killing each other just seems so pointless. When you first get on orbit, you want to look at your hometown and your home country, and then after a while, you're just kind of looking at your continent, and then pretty soon, you just start to feel like you're a part of the world. You're from the United States and appreciate that, but you no longer feel like you're just from the United States. It's not like looking at a map. It's just one Earth. There's no boundaries. There's nothing dividing the countries. If more people had that experience, then I think it would go a long way towards perhaps beginning to solve a lot of the problems we have here on Earth. And it's absolutely amazing. And you'll hear every astronaut cosmonaut, taikonaut, everybody feels the same way. You just look back and think, man, this is one little jewel of a planet. Travel here on Earth, too, broadens your perspectives and your understanding of other people and cultures. Even if you're one of the lucky people to live to be 105 like my grandmother, in the vastness of time and space, that isn't a lot. So, you just need to go and explore. Because every time you go to another country or you have a different experience, it really pushes you to be better. It just changes everything. You appreciate each experience more. And I think that's what we all love about it. Travel makes you a better person, a better citizen of this planet of ours.